Reach high, aim high, and obtain.
Okay, so what I have here is I cleaned this thoroughly because of what I'm getting ready to do, which is culture vegetables. And what I've got is I've got this, it's actually a special ceramic piece that's attached to this one-way hose that's actually attached to an A to Z Ozone ink device. And basically what you do is cold water, and then you're supposed to basically put on, let me come over here, the ozone and the compressor, and then you can see here, and then it's ozoning. It's actually putting ozone in the water, so it's turning it into ozone water. And the reason I do this is because the cabbage, we're currently not in a state where we have enough cabbages to do this on our own, so I have to buy it in the store. And I like, because cabbages have so many layers, there really isn't a way to, soap and shampoo the cabbages, so, and get them really clean. So what I do is I ozone the water, and what it does is it actually helps remove bacteria and stuff that's bad, because it's like putting pure oxygen in it. And basically I just put this in the water, get the water ozonated, and just bob the cabbages around. And I do this with the other vegetables because, especially with what's going on now, let me turn them off. Once you get it ozoned enough, because you can kind of smell it once it gets ozoned enough. And you have to be cautious, because ozone, if you breathe too much, it can actually, a person could drown in their own liquid. So this isn't something to be done carelessly. But the main thing about this is, because of what is being put on foods that are grown outside of your own purview and your own, controls, I think it's important to get them as clean as possible, because you don't know what's going on. And, there's such as E. coli and food poisoning that can happen simply because, stuff gets on the vegetables from the field workers at times too. So to me, it's very important to start as clean as possible, which is what this is doing. And I'll put everything kind of in this, and I'll rotate it around and just make sure I get that liquid as much as possible into the cabbages themselves. These have already had the stems cut off, because my dad was so helpful, because he knows how long this process takes. And on the positive, it does open up the cabbage a little bit more, because that way, see, you can see the air bubbles coming out of the cabbage itself, because it's going into all those nooks and crannies with the ozone. But the first thing I did is I thoroughly scrubbed and cleaned the sink, because you don't want any bacteria to be your starting point. And then, of course, filled it full of water, ozoned it, and then, of course, I've got my cabbages. I'm just rotating them around, making sure it's getting good and covered. Then I'm going to put in my carrots, my celery, and then I'll get out what I use. So what I like to use is, I also have this potato scrubber I bought years ago. It's by Full Circle. And I actually use this to scrub the root vegetables. So if I want to use beets, or I'm going to also use some ginger. So I'm going to actually pop that in there. And I'm going to put in some kale, because to me, I start with the basic 3 C's is how I look at it, which is celery, carrots, and cabbage. I call it 3 C's because it's all the k sound. And I've learned that that's the best starting point for making culture vegetables. Now, what you can do from there is add any extras. And I tend to like to jazz it up from there by, let's say if I feel like, oh, I want to give my liver a little bit of help, I'll put some beets with it, and it'll turn the entire concoction really bright, dark red. If I put kale with it, it'll turn a little bit green, which I do have that today. I always like to put a little piece of ginger, because it adds, not like a huge amount. Oh, let me turn that off, because I'm heating up my water there. I always like to put a little piece of ginger, because it adds a little bit of spice. And ginger is also really great for any stomach upset, and just that really nice extra little surprise when you're eating your culture vegetables or fermented vegetables, depending on how you want to look at it. So I'm just going to drop that in there. And the other thing that's positive about this, when you put it in water, you can actually strip the skin. So you don't have to worry so much about how it's functioning or how clean it is or isn't, because you can just peel the skin off of it just by hydrating it. And if you have an old piece of ginger, just hydrate it and it'll literally plump up and you can just peel the skin. But you can also do, I like to add kale in it, ginger. I pretty much, the ginger is just when I feel like it, and I felt like it today. But literally, I started with the 3 C's is how I look at it, because of the benefits of what both cabbage, carrots, and celery add. Celery is known to have a lot of enzymes in it, so it's great for facilitating digestion. Plus, it's got a bit of fiber to it, because of all the strings you see. And then carrots, loaded with beta carotene. And I noticed growing up my mom said when I ate a lot of carrots and celery, which I still love to do, that I didn't burn as much. When I went out in the sun, I actually would get a tan. So I feel like there must be some properties in it that maybe help with that function. I can't say that's 100% certainty. I'm just saying that's what my mom observed with my skin as a little girl growing up. Now, the other thing is, once I do this, there's also, I have I just heated up some water to boiling temperature. And the reason I'm doing this is I'm going to take this boiling water and I'm actually going to pour it over these items here, which is the weights and the lid to my container here. Those are the weights. And I put them purposely in the lid when I go to sanitize them, so I don't have to worry about them moving around or damaging. And then I sanitize this, which is my actual fermenting crock. This is a 5-liter container. And then this container, I absolutely love this. It took me forever to find one. But this is a copper with stainless steel inside. And you see this thing is quite deep. And I purposely bought this for when I do cultured vegetables, because it is so big and it allows me to really go in there and work all the vegetables and foods around. So I do a sanitized hot water on this, and I also do a sanitized hot watering on our Breville machine. Let me bring it over here, because I also cleaned my countertop here, because that way if anything falls off of my cutting board that I'm also going to sanitize, I don't have to worry about it because my surface is already thoroughly clean. This was truly a game changer for me, frankly, because this is a 16-cup container is what this is. And this thing is just fabulous. It really was a game changer. I acknowledge I had a Cuisinart. I did it for years, but the capacity was extremely small compared to what this does. This, I can put so much in there, and the blades are extremely sharp. So it really chops it up for me. And the reason why is you're looking to break the cell walls of your vegetables and your cabbage so that it is basically broken down as much as possible into its finest particle so that it is easier to digest. You can get actually more volume in your container because the chunks aren't so big, so you can actually get more out of it. And at the same time, it's nutritionally dense because you fermented it. Now, there are different options when it comes to how to culture or ferment your vegetables. The one basic that's pretty much unchanged for centuries is salt. I prefer to do the salted salt. We have done the Himalayan salt doing this process, but I found we didn't like the flavor as much. So pick the salt that calls to you the best, that's easily available, but obviously you want to avoid iodized or the standard table salt because they put things like anti-caking agents and stuff in it that actually would kill the good bacteria that you're actually looking to feed when you're doing this. So make sure it is a quality salt that is unaltered by man is the best way to put it. So we prefer the Celtic salt. You can do a good ferment just doing this. If you are worried about any type of contamination or maybe overcrowding, because the whole concept of this is creating more good than bad bacteria, so that it literally crowds it out, not only in your body, but in the food itself, because there's bacteria naturally present everywhere, even on our skin and in our bodies. And that's just part of nature. You can do a starter packet or a cultured starter, which I had those here. And occasionally I do do this, and it's just because I want a little extra oomph. So I usually use a combination of these two, because these are two different types of ferments, is the best way to put it, or starters. This one is mainly for kefir, so it's got a different bacteria in it than the culture starter. Now, the culture starter is fabulous when it comes to things like starches, your heavy starches, and you can see they come in these little packets. The one thing I don't like about them is I feel like they're in a little aluminum containers, and I'm not a fan of aluminum, just for the health of my family. But on the positive, I also look at it as, if there is any, that the good bacteria would eat it up and take care of it for us. So, but I acknowledge these things are a little bit old because of the date used by, but I purposely kept these in the freezer. So that, because when you put a culture in like a freezer or a cold environment, it pretty much halts the process. So, and I've had these for a few years, and I haven't had them go bad, to be frank. I know they say it's expired by this, but for me, I mean, it just looks like it worked for me just
Now,
fine.
why are you using, pardon me, the kefir starter in your culture?
Because well, here's the thing. You don't have to do this, but it has, like I said, it has a different bacteria and different culture. So here's a great example. See how long this list is?
Mm-hmm.
And see how tiny this list is?
Perfect.
So like this one has Elsie lactis, Elsie cremoris. I hope I'm pronouncing it. I mean, this list just goes on and then ends with inulin, which is basically like a type of, I think that's like a type of fiber. So it's probably keeping the cultures fed. Over here, it ends with the same ingredient, but you can see here, it's got 1, 2, 3 different ones. Now the cultures, or the bacteria, that's the good bacteria, people, or the good grains. On this one is designed more for eating things like breads, starches, heavy, dense items. This is going to help you more with if you're eating dairies. Because why? It's a kefir starter. So it's helping with digestion of dairies or high fat items, high fat and protein. So I like to do a combination of these two so that I get a good balance of that. Because when you're eating, what are you doing? You're mixing different foods. You're mixing different ingredients. And this way, it doesn't matter what food I'm eating, I'm covered. Is the best way to look at it. But that's just my personal preference on that. And because I do so much, I'll do between 1 of each or 2 of each. It just really depends on how big your batch is, to be frank. And because I'm doing a 5 liter and I frankly just feel like it, I'm going to add an extra one. I usually do about 4 altogether because I'm doing such a large batch of product, or I mean of the ferments. And you can see, oh, you can actually see right here on the back. It says right here, kefir is an ancient culture fruit containing amino acids, enzymes, vitamins, and minerals. So it's telling you what it's giving you by using this. And then over here, vegetables or cream into delicious tasting probiotic foods. It's the most economical way to maintain the flora in your digestive tract. Culture foods with enzymes are easier to digest than raw foods and have a valuable probiotic effect. So I just took my boiling water and poured it over things. And then these, I got hot water on. But these are Gorilla silicone. It's got some padding on it. Mm-hmm. Protective oven mitts. These things to me are invaluable if you're going to do this, which is the hot water to sanitize. Some people say you don't need to do this. I'm not comfortable doing vegetables personally without doing this. But that's just my personal, and then I just rotate the hot water around to cover all the surface area. So I know it's now clean. And I did the same thing with my big metal bowl there. And I'm going to rotate that into position and put that in there. And then I'm pretty much ready to go now. And my vegetables, happily, are finished with its process. And let me show you this. I'm going to quickly do this real quick. Because that, just in case you were wondering, that metal pin doesn't actually touch the vegetables, because I did do that with my bare hand. It actually goes into the insert in the lid, so it doesn't actually go down or touch the vegetables or anything. So, but what we're going to do here, as you can see how I got cut. Now, one thing I did learn, and I have learned when it comes to cabbages, when it comes to a food processor, which is it doesn't like it because it's extremely squeaky. And it really likes grabbing onto the plastic surface. Our container, though, is BPA free. I will point that out. But it really grabs. But I learned if I put carrots with the cabbage as I food process it doesn't stick so much, and it allows everything to blend better too. So let me get some carrots. And I did also do some quick hot water on my cutting board. But what I'm doing now is getting everything that I scrubbed and processed out of the sink now, because I forgot, but I'm doing it now. I usually do my sanitizing before I do my ozonation, so all my stuff's ready to go. But the main thing here is just really taking your time to do this. Now you can see here, see all the water draining out of the cabbage holes? No. Okay. Well, anyways, I like to shake the cabbages out in the sink, because remember, all the ozonated water got into it. So when I go to cut this thing, it's gonna put the water in there. That's why I like to use a cutting board that has a bit of a moat to it around the edges, so that it doesn't cause too much of an issue with that. Now, the other thing with the cabbages is I like to save just a few of the outer leaves before I actually cut it. Dad got a little bit enthused with that particular one, so he started cutting it to help me out. But this one, it hasn't been cut yet. So first, check the leaves to see if there's any blackening. Case in point right there. You will want to remove that. So we're going to peel that away, and we're going to peel this away. Because why? That is mold. That is not something you want to be putting in your food or feeding with your ferment. Now you can see here, there's still a little bit on this leaf. So we're going to have to take this leaf off as well.
Cut it off as opposed to taking the whole
Well, if I start cutting it off, I'm going to cut potentially the outer leaves that I want to save for putting the weight down. Okay, so that should be, okay, so see here, we're now working with a clean surface. That's one thing I can say about, that I don't really like about store-bought cabbage, is you got to peel away sometimes one or more layers. Oh, I can cut that one off. That one isn't so bad because it's not touching any other leaves, and it's just a slight ding. So I'll just cut that off, and then we should be fine. Let me rinse that real quick. But you can see the other ones, though, they were specks. It was kind of all over the place. It was quite deep. So you need to make sure you peel the cabbages until you get to a good, clean working surface. Now you can see on this one, it's got a bit of black right there. But again, it looks like it's more created from a knife that caused it to be exposed rather than it actually being bacteria formed. So I'm just going to cut that one off. And then let's see what we have. Okay, now see here? That's bad bacteria. So we need to make sure that that is removed from even getting in our ferment. Okay, and then we need to check it thoroughly. Now, I do feel some spots here, but I think that's just a natural occurrence. It's not any actual bacteria. But I like to, oops. Now I do see some spots there. So I do need to take this piece off. Okay, I hate having to do this because I feel like I keep losing cabbage every time I do this, because to a sense you kind of are. Okay, this one does have black. Okay, so now I've got 2 usable working cabbages. Now see, because this one hasn't had a cut to it, but this one kind of has. But this one, because the leaf here, I can actually save a few of the leaves here and a few of the leaves here. And then the rest I'll actually use in the cutting process. But this right here, the reason, you'll probably be like, why are you saving those leaves? So what I'll do is I'll take some of these leaves here. And this one's perfect because it's large. You want to use large leaves because the smaller the leaf, the more hard it's going to kind of be working with to be able to hold everything down with, because the bigger the leaf, the more you kind of comply than under normal circumstances. Let's see. And they do kind of rip a little bit. It's no big deal because these are just more or less just to help with the weight and holding things down. And it allows you to actually manipulate it a little bit more, I found sometimes, when it's not perfect. Because I found sometimes when it's perfect, it likes to round up like it's back on the cabbage itself. So, but this will work out perfectly. Okay, let me get my fabulous knife that I get to use finally.
This is the new shun?
Yeah, this is my new shun.
Oh.
And I had already cleaned it.
First time using it.
Yes, it's my first time using it. And I'm excited because this will get around. Remember how I was talking about getting it around a cabbage?
This is all the ones that you're using for
these are all the ones I'm going to be
top.
keeping
Yes.
to do what we're doing. So let me get the water off the handle there. Okay, so let me show you why I love a good shun. Okay, so because Dad cut off the bottom here. See how it lays perfectly flat? That to me is so important when you're doing this. So you can just slice through that. See how quickly that was?
Whoa.
I mean,
like
it's
through
just,
butter, huh?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I love a good shun knife. And then I found, you just kind of want to, and I'm really not pushing that hard, to be frank, compared to most standard knives. Now you can see this is a little bit big, but look at how it covers the circumference of that cabbage.
Whoa.
And see, my hand isn't near the blade by doing that. That's why I bought this knife, because I needed one long enough to protect my hands when I'm doing this kind of stuff, but at the same time I needed a knife that was extremely sharp to get the job done. Okay, and then you can see here, now the only reason I'm doing this is because even though the Breville can handle cabbage quite well, to be frank, I love how shun just cuts through things like butter. The main reason that I'm doing this is because I'm helping it out just a little bit, because I found they don't really like cabbages in these kind of machines. It really likes to stick and hold, and it's just not very pleasant. Now, what I will do now is, like I mentioned, I like to put some carrots with now these are a little bit big, but I don't need to cut these down very large. Now I don't know if other people do this, but I usually like to keep the peeling on my carrots. Dad thoughtfully peeled them for me, so just be aware. I don't normally peel my carrots, but this will still work because you're still getting the nutrition that you're looking for in the carrot. Okay, and let me add just a few more carrots. Now, here's where you have a question of, did you want kale in your ferment, or did you want something else? And are you looking to add celery or not? This is when those questions come into play. And the thing is, the main basics of a good ferment is cabbage. So you don't even need to do this other stuff. You can just do cabbage. Now, remember I told you about soaking ginger? Watch this. I can literally, see that? Peel it with my fingernail. It's gotten so pliable now. See that?
Wow.
I mean, it's really nice, but I'm going to make it just a little bit easier so I have a better work surface here. And see here, it just plies right off. You could even use a spoon doing this, but this knife was readily available. So, and I use this knife all the time to peel items. But see here, it just comes right off. And see, most ginger, think about how hard it is to peel ginger, right? And this stuff is just falling off. Now, another thing, and you're actually standing on it, Mom, is it's great to have a working mat, because when you're on, like right now, we're on hardwood floors, it's extremely tough, especially when you're doing this for as many hours as what we are. But I'm purposely letting Mom be on that side so you guys can see this okay. But the main purpose of this is, you know, just being able to peel this ginger and get it taken care of. But I think it's good to have a mat, because when you enjoy cooking as much as we do, then you need to make sure you take care of yourself, because cooking is not a casual sport. You know, some people are like, oh, they're a cook, you know, no big deal. It is an extremely big deal, especially if you're cooking from scratch, which is what we tend to do in this family, is we tend to cook from scratch. And I'm not saying go out, buy a box that has flour, baking soda, sugar, etc., and all you got to do is add water and an egg. No, I'm talking about you take the flour, if you need to sift it, you sift it, etc. So you can see here how this is just peeling so easily. Though that I accidentally cut. But now I do still take off the ends of the ginger, because the ends aren't really peelable as much to me, just in general. But see that? Oop, I got a piece there. I need to, there we go. But see that? I got it fully peeled. And in just moments. Now there are ginger pieces where you can actually take this and grate it, or you can put it in a special ginger thing where you do this, and we actually have both of those. But I'm not going to be using that today, because I'm using a, you know, Breville, excuse me, I'm using a Breville food processor. So I just need to make these just enough of a chunk. I can just drop it in there as I do each section of, you know, the blending and the grinding down of the vegetables. So I'm just going to make these few little chunks just so I have something to work with. And that'll make this process a lot easier. And now I've got my ginger ready to go. Now, here's the thing that I think a lot of people don't talk about, is the setup in regards to this, and also the approach in some regards. Now, remember I mentioned salt and cultures and stuff. Well, one thing I do, and it doesn't mean you have to do it, and some people actually say don't do this, but this is just my thing, is I like to take Willard water. Let me find my bottle here real quick. I like to take this Willard water, which is the ultimate concentrate, because it has ancient fossils in it, and it's loaded with vitamins and minerals. And remember, when you ferment, you're exponentially increasing the vitamin load and digestion of whatever you're putting in this. So what I do, and it's been a while since I did it, is I take a little bit of this right here. Not much. I do about a tablespoon of this, and then I do about a tablespoon of the Willard water, and I add the cultures to it. Because remember, cultures like to eat sugar up to a point. And it's kind of like mead. They use honey to make mead. So that's kind of the concept I'm going here. And plus you use yeast and sugars to make a wine or a beer, and you get a concoction. So what I like to do is I like to take Willard water, because I like to get as nutritiously dense, because when you put this much effort into something, you want that nutritional density. So what I found is the honey kind of helps with the salt to sweet balance. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do it, and some people are like, don't do honey, it's bad. But I found if you do more carrots, let's say you don't want to do this, okay? If you do more carrots, your ferment, I found, will come out sweeter. Because why? Carrots are naturally sweet. So it actually is a benefit to you to use more carrots if you want to. because I feel like sometimes if I don't do enough carrots, the ferment is so bitter that it's just too much. So I found if I balance it out with just enough carrots, it's sweet, it's palatable, it's not so, oh my goodness, this is bitter. So this is a workaround. It's just making sure you add more carrots. So how come I have so many carrots? Is because it is loaded with things like beta carotene. That is fabulous for your body. So you're exponentially, when you ferment it, it's like taking that number of what it is and multiplying it times what the value is of the nutrition in that item. And the one thing they do say too, just so you know, cabbage and things, there's certain root vegetables that they actually say are not, or ideally should not be eaten raw, because apparently it can mess with the thyroid. But when you ferment it, it gets rid of the property that can actually cause issues with a person's thyroid. So that's another reason why I ferment the cabbage. Cabbage is extremely nutritious, but it's not good to eat without fermenting because they say it does mess with the thyroid. And there's research behind that. You can certainly look it up. But I just want to mention that just so you're aware that there are certain things that do mess potentially with the thyroid. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this hooked up, and I have to pull this. That's the one negative. You have to pull the cord and push it, but it does a great job. So let me get this plugged in and just show you. This is really quick. So I'll just do power and we'll start it. And see how quick that is? That's done. Because of what I'm getting ready to do, I did thoroughly clean my hands using a scrubber. This means I got under my nails. I did thoroughly back and front, and I actually went up my arm a good amount because you can see how deep this bowl is compared to my arm. And I'm going to be putting my arm all the way down in there. And so this way it keeps the sanitization. So at this point, like I mentioned, I like to add minerals. So I got a little concoction here that's the cultured vegetables and the minerals. You don't have to do this, but I like to add minerals to vitamins and minerals to my batch. But if you're going to do that, make sure it's something that's not going to have a wonky flavor because it will do you no good to add it if it's got a wonky flavor. Now, one thing I do at this point is I keep my left hand in the bowl. I keep my right hand outside the bowl. Now, why is because I'm going to be dipping my hand into this to basically salt my vegetables here. So what I start doing is working, when I add minerals, is working it in because I had to do things in layers. So for example, all the kale here, you can see the greens at the bottom. So this gives me an opportunity to go down in there and basically make my hand the mixer. And you can see how well everything got chopped up. I used to do all of this with, actually by hand pretty much, with breaking the cell wall down. But I would have my vegetables be a lot bigger than what you're seeing here. This is more like I'd say a baby food consistency. It's not quite, like liquidy, but it still has some texture. But by doing that, I didn't have to take my sauerkraut pounder, which I love, by the way. Oops, I did miss one carrot. That does occasionally happen, so I'll eat that raw. But in general, you would use the sauerkraut pounder, which I have one. I love it. But I found that this saves me so much work. Oh my goodness. So I'm going to take some salt, and I like to sprinkle it around.
And you just do pinches at a time.
Yeah,
right?
You just want to do pinches at a time because you don't want to do so much that you go, oh, that's salty. You're just wanting enough salt, at least in my taste buds. Everyone's taste buds are different. This is when you find the, the pieces that you miss. But you just want to do a little bit at a time, and then you want to stop after you've mixed it and taste it. Now, the reason for that is, oh, there's a few more chunks. That's called the layering I missed. But, I mean, those chunks compared to what I was having to deal with, which is doing this very manually. I do have a, what's it called? What's that company? Salad Master Food. What's that grinder thing called? I can't think of what it's called at the moment. But it's basically like a manual food grinder. And it'll do it. And it's awesome. But it just doesn't break down the cell walls as much as I'd like. And the whole point of doing this is breaking down the cell walls so that there's no air that can impact the health of your ferment. Now I'm going to take a little piece there, and I'm not going to put it on my mouth, but I'm going to hover it above my mouth and drop it in and taste it. Okay. That's pretty good, actually. I still think it needs maybe just a little bit more salt. Now remember, I put cultures in it. That does occasionally happen when you're using a food processor and you can't see the bottom of the container. But just mix it really, really well at this point. And you want to get it really thoroughly in there. Now watch this. If I press, well, actually you can't see it as much, but when you squeeze, see how you're getting liquid out? That's what you want. I usually get more liquid. Let's see here. Oh, there you go. You can see it now. See that?
Wow.
See, the more you press, that's what you're wanting. Now, I know that the standard body ecology approach is you take a portion of this, you blend it in a blender with the cultures. I personally feel like when I'm doing that, I'm wasting my food by blending it. And then you have all this liquid left over because the liquid's part of your brine. Or at least that's what they're, but see here now? You got all this liquid that's produced by what? Adding the salt, because the salt draws out the liquid. And that's what you want. And I like this better because then I'm not adding a salt water to it. This way I'm letting the vegetables be its own brine. And I feel like it's healthy that way because then I can take the liquid and actually drink it. Because why? It's the salt and the liquid from the vegetables. So let's give this another taste. Oh, that's good. That's another thing I've learned here. If it tastes bad in this, it's going to taste bad when it ferments. So if it tastes wonky at this point, do whatever you need to do to fix it. Because if it doesn't taste good, it won't taste good when it's fermented. Actually, it'll taste worse, I found. So let's give it another taste because that was just one section. Now, I think I'll probably want Dad to taste this real quick. Dad, I need to taste this real quick. Excuse me? You can pause it real quick, Ma. You can pause it. Okay, so you can see here how much water. See all that water? That's from the vegetables. I mean, obviously there's a little bit from the Willard water, but I mean, that was only like a tablespoon. This, you're looking at more than a tablespoon of liquid now. And some actually say let the salt sit on the vegetables a little bit, and it'll actually draw out more water from the vegetables. See here? Look at how much is just coming out. I love that. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to, well, I like to say we're going to cork this sucker, but that's my turn of phrase. That isn't like a technical term or anything. But what I've done here, let me bring this over. Okay, as I've already sanitized this, but remember, I'm keeping my right hand out, my left hand in, so that way I'm keeping things sanitary. So I used my right hand here to lift it so that my left hand is still good. So we're just going to place this in there. And what you do is you just press it down and into this surface. And as you press it down, it creates like a layering of a cake effect. But now realize you want to press it down as much as possible from the get-go, because the more you put in at one time, the more air it's going to have, which means it's going to be a little bit more raised. So if you've made a big batch, you might need a second container. And I do have a second container because sometimes the cabbages, they'll be too big or too small sometimes. And so it's kind of hard to gauge until everything's, you know, chopped up. And then, well, how many carrots did you put? Oh, I had that extra bags. Let me throw it in there. And then you're working with more. So rather than waste a batch, I actually have a second container because I discovered I needed it. I don't use it all the time, but when I do, it's used with purpose, and this way my vegetables stay good. Now, there are other ways of doing it, which is you can get glass weights. I would make sure that they're lead-free because this is a ferment. But when you do this, you have to avoid plastic and metal. Those are the two properties to avoid when you're doing this. And you may say, it makes a very big deal because you're actually doing an kind of like an acid ferment. This is a lactic acid type ferment approach. Even though it's got cultures in it, it's still got a type of acid to it. What does acid do? It eats metal. It eats plastic. You don't want that in your food. That is a proven fact. It will leach into your food if you do this type of ferment in plastic or metal. So the best way to do it is glass, or like this, a special designated fermenting crock. Now, I made sure that this crock is lead-free. That's a key, lead-free, because why? You're doing a ferment here. Not all containers are lead-free, so make sure that you ask, if you're buying this in the store or you're looking online, that you look for and you ask, is this lead-free? And ideally, a really high fire glaze, because high fire means it's going to be extremely strong. High fire is where you get the equivalent of a microwave type device or tool. I wouldn't do that with this, obviously.
My question.
Uh-huh.
Since you said not to use metal, you have it in this metal bowl only because it's so temporary, right?
Yeah. I actually wanted a ceramic bowl, but I couldn't find one that was big enough for what I'm doing. But this is such a quick in there. It's not resting in there permanently. There's a difference. I'm only mixing it in here enough to actually put it together, just to stir it. That's the same thing with the Breville. It's a brief in and out. This is going to be in there for 24 plus hours. This is going to be in there for days. Now, some people like a week or ferment, which means they would only let it be like 2 or 3 days inside the container. Me, I like to do it for at least about 5 days to a week, minimal, doing this. But you're right, and thank you for asking that question, because people will probably say, but you got it in a stainless steel bowl right now. And you're right. It's just for a brief moment in time, though. I'm not permanently. It's when you leave it in there as an approach of a ferment. This is just like I'm needing a mixing bowl approach. That's all this is.
And actually, typically, don't we ferment longer than a week?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what it is, because what I like to hear is this thing to burp. And you may be like, burp? Yeah. That's the fabulous thing about this. It will actually release air bubbles as the pressure in here builds from the ferment. Now, I want to point out how high this is inside. I don't know if you can see that real well, but you can see there's about that much space before you hit the angle of this portion. So I don't have that much room left. So I may have to actually get out my second container.
Mm-hmm.
So I will have to, thankfully I still have my hot water. I'm good to go. But I'm going to have to, because why? Because I need to put the cabbages down on top here so we don't have anything floating on top, because whatever floats on top, it's not going to be usable, because it means it was outside of the environment of the water, which means it's more than likely contaminated, and you don't want that. So I think I need to stop there, because the weights are about 1 inch, and that's about 1 inch from where I need it to be. So this is where, so I'll do this other stuff in my other crock, but see how much liquid here is generated? And that's just from the vegetables, so we don't have to worry so much. And there's actually a little bit when I press down. Now, the reason I like to put these down there is so that I have, and you can see here, I'm going to arch these cabbage leaves. But as I press this down, it's also generating water. But the main approach to this is to make sure that I cover the top, to make sure that there's not a ton of things that floats up from the the bottom. And feel free to cut the cabbage leaf. There's no rule that says you can't cut these cabbage leaves to make it work. Okay, so there we go. I got that. I do see I need a little piece there in the middle though. So I'm just gonna plop that there. See? I got everything pretty much. Ooh, I do see where the cabbage ripped there. So I'm gonna put a piece there. So now I've got my sides covered. So now I'm going to use these weights and put them in there. Now it will tilt on me, so just be careful, but you just slide this in there and then you'll slide in the other one here. And the reason why I have to leave it so far from the top is because you have to still get the weights in. I've done this before where I've put the weights in and then I had to angle them out and it was very tough. But see here, I'm pressing down and see all the green coming up? It's because you want the water to come up. But in this case, it's not just water, it's the juices from the actual vegetables. But basically, I'm pressing down to get rid of the air bubbles. And I can see, I don't know if you can see air bubbles, the bubbles on the top rim. But I'm pressing down to get rid of the air that's formed in between the layers, just because I have it so pliable. But at the same time, by pressing down, I'm releasing the water that was in the vegetables and getting them to cover my weights, because you want the water to cover the weights. If for some instance you didn't put enough salt, or maybe the vegetables were on the dry side and you're not getting the water generated like what I have here, that's when you need to add just a little bit of salt water. I don't like doing it unless I absolutely have to, but you can see here, I'm going to put my finger. I have that much liquid above. So what I did is I put my finger there, put my thumb as to where the water level is so that I could see how much water I'm working with. And that to me is something critical to do when you're doing this process. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see it on your side, Mom. But there's air bubbles on the top line of the liquid. That is the ferment actually working now. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a cloth and keep it out of the inside here, but I'm going to clean up the rim and put the lid on so we can actually seal this. And then what I like to do is I like to take hot water, so the water that I use for sanitizing that's already been boiled, and I put it into a pouring container. I add a little bit of salt to it so it becomes salt water, and I actually pour it in the channel here that actually seals all of this so that it doesn't get contaminated, because that's the main thing with the ferment, is you want to prevent contamination. So that's what I do at this point, is do that. Now, once you've done this, because this isn't clear glass, you don't have to worry so much about this being in a dark place. It does need to be in a semi-cool place because you want it to just kind of relax and ferment. But that's what I love about the ceramic, is it's naturally cooling and no light's getting in because it is ceramic. That's why I tend to actually avoid the glass, because it's clear when I do this type of ferment. Now, once I've uncorked it, but that's my term, when I'm ready to eat it, is I do put it in glass, but I put it in the fridge. So again, it's not in direct sunlight. It's just in the fridge, and I put it in the fridge because when you freeze it or you drop the temperature of it, it stops fermenting. The longer it stays at room temperature or higher, and I wouldn't go above actually body temperature, to be frank, which is about 98 degrees, because you don't want to cook them. You just want them to thrive. Then I would say that this, you put it in the fridge so that it actually stops fermenting as much as possible. Because I've had some in there, because I usually do about a container a month of about this size of the salt. It usually makes about 3 containers when I do this, and usually we go about through a container a month. So when I get to my last container, like I do now, then I make a new batch. And you can even use the ferment from the prior batch to actually inoculate your new batch, but it's usually only good for so long. And if there's something wonky about the flavor, you don't want that carrying over into your new batch. So I hesitate to use a prior batch to do it unless it was just a perp, which I've done that before. But I tend to not, because I always like to change the variety and the flavor, because if you've had it for 2-3 months, you want a different flavor. So I tend to kind of be, let me start from scratch. So let's clean up the lid here. And then I'm going to put my salt water in it. And then I'm just going to put this on the counter and let it be. So let me wash the stuff off my hands real quick. But yeah, this is me just wiping it down. This is a clean cloth that I haven't used for anything. It's fresh, and it's fresh from being washed and everything. But I'm just more or less cleaning out the channel here, because some vegetables occasionally do fall in this, and you need to make sure that you get that channel clean, because whatever's in there, again, because it's on the top of the water, it'll go bad, and you don't want that in your channel, because it'll also cause potential bacteria to form as well. So make sure it's clean. I'm gonna press this down just a little bit because it's wanting to pop up on me there, even though it's got plenty of water. Okay, so now let's put our lid on, and again, I sanitized that too. Now I'm going to grab my mom's fabulous Pyrex container here. Whoop! I didn't see that one there. Thank you, Mom. Okay, and I'm going to put some of the hot water I have here. Looks like it's the last of it, but that's usually about where I end up. And it's still just a little, it's not boiling, but it's still a little bit warm. So what I'm going to do is just put, you just need a pinch. You don't need much, because you're just wanting enough to put it into like a little bit of a saltwater state. That's it. Doesn't take much. And feel free to taste it just to make sure. I need a spoon here so I can stir it. Thank you, Mommy. One thing that they did when they built this house, they put the drawers on your side instead of this one. Makes no sense to me because the stove's on this side. Okay, and then of course the salt obviously dissolves in water. And just stir it around. Get it really good. I'm going to taste that. Yep, salt water it is. Okay, and then all we do, or I should say I do, make sure you place this where you want it before you do this right here, okay? But you just pour this. And I like to do it in the center so it covers it. And what it does, there's actually arches on different positions. There's usually 2 on this one. I should show you my other one here, just so you have a visual. Okay, yeah, here we go. So the way this is designed, it's got these arches cut into the lid. And what that is that is your line you need to be above for the water, for it to truly seal. And then what happens is the pressure builds, the bubbles come out. Oh, see, there's a bubble. It just formed. It comes out of the channel here as the pressure builds inside the container. And that's what allows you to not have to worry about it so much. Now, if you don't have a crock like this, don't worry. A glass canning jar will work just as well. Just make sure you have a weight that you can put on top of it. Like I mentioned, lead-free. Now, I purposely not filled this all the way to the top because I still need to move this where I need to put it. But they do have other options if you can't or don't have the option to get that kind of a container. And I'm going to show you this here real quick. Okay, so you can get what's called pickling pebbles. And what they are is they're actually glass weights. Let me open this. That you can actually put on top of the ferment to make sure it stays underneath the brine or your liquid ferment, however you prefer to do it. Because this is really about what is your preference, what's available to you, what's your option. And then you can put the top, you can put this. And what it is, it looks like a little nipple. It's cute as can be. And what it does is it has these little air holes. I don't know if you can see that. And what it does is it arches as the pressure builds, and then it does a one-way release on it. I found, for me at least, these didn't work for me. I don't know if it's my area, but I just felt like for me it didn't work so
Can
well.
we see the front of it?
Oh yeah, thank you. But it's usually a pack of 4 that these come in. Same thing with the pickling pebbles, or whatever weight you want to do. Just make sure, no matter what it is, that it's lead free. And I would just say do your research on that, because that stuff because it's an acid ferment, and that's pretty much what it is. It's a lactic acid, etc. I would be aware of everything that you were fermenting it in, that you were containing it in, because that is going to be in your food.
Okay.
And I think that'll get you started. Oh, did you hear that?
We did.
I did just, oh, there you go. See that bubble? I don't know if
that is awesome.
But see, that's another thing I occasionally do is it'll start bubbling now. And I like to call it burping because it's like the container is literally burping. It's releasing the air that's contained inside of its body. And what I can do is I can come around and I can actually move this, and I can actually feel the pressure underneath the lid. And sometimes I like to do that until it's fully sealed, is what I like to call it, because it lets me know how much pressure is building up. But you can tell when it's fully sealed because the lid stops having that air so much underneath, and it doesn't like to move. That's when you know it's, to me, in the state of, okay, I can actually take this out now and start consuming. But that's just my personal approach to it. You'll figure out your own. It's like cooks in the kitchen. 2 people can make the same dish and they'll come out completely different. So, this is something you can play around with, see what works best for you, taste bud wise, flavor wise. And this is just something that really provides you with the opportunity not just to enhance your health, but your health and your family too, because of what this will provide to you as you consume your foods.